last season, Riot thought Lost Chapter mage items were a bit too strong, so they nerfed most items' base stats and reduced the impact of Luden's isolation damage in an effort to make them more defined. And don't get me wrong, those passives are super strong and important, but they're not the reason you build them as first items. Because their passives don't have much impact in the early game, they're now mostly utility focused, plus they're only valuable when they can be used, whereas the stats they give apply to all of your spells all of the time, which is why dropping the AP or CDR they give has actually ended up crippling the mage ecosystem overall and opening the door to this near tank mage meta. Essentially, skipping over all the complicated stuff we'll talk about later, people in Korea figured out that Lost Chapter items don't really do enough damage, and that building a more tanky first item like Rod of Ages on a champion like Ahri actually makes way more sense. Even though she can't one-shot people as easily, because she has so much more health, she's completely unkillable, which allows her to get more spells off and lets her go for plays that she literally wouldn't be able to make before. This underlying idea of building HP because no one has enough damage to kill you is what is essentially giving birth to this Bruiser mage meta. But the problem with that is that HP items obviously don't let you do that much damage, which is where the new mask stacking builds come in. If you build ROA because all other first items suck, then why not double down on the health stacking with items that synergize with it? Nearly every Haunting Guise item has a unique passive that increases your damage by a percentage, and each of them play off each other. The Andrew's Burn can be procced more often the tankier you are, and Riftmaker's passive literally gives you AP scaling with your health. With both of these items, you deal 14% bonus damage, which more than makes up for the lack of AP, and even though it's essentially impossible to say how much Bloodletter's Curse gets you, 30% MR Shred also increases your damage significantly. But the real reason these builds have become so insanely strong over the last few patches is far less mathematical. This build is just extremely solo queue compatible, because being tanky means you require less skill to win the game. The HP you'd normally lose when making a mistake means considerably less, and because the build is more forgiving, it's also far more reliable. So let's talk about who can actually build it. Everyone's aware of the classic ROA abusers like Ryze, Cassio, Caston, and Anivia, but pretty much every mage can build ROA first item. Champs that want to get into the mix and deal damage up close, this lets you do more damage because it keeps you alive. And for champs that don't do that, this lets you do more damage because it keeps you alive. More seriously, ROA does really help in lane, especially in aggressive matchups. You build it in the same way you used to build Zhonya's first against Zed. The extra health makes those matchups less punishing without putting yourself too far behind, and it makes ganks against you less likely to succeed and your lane less appealing to the enemy jungler overall. In terms of specifics, Vex is an incredibly good ROA abuser because, like Ahri, she gets resets and has a relatively low range kit. So this build allows her to get more damage off because she can survive for longer, which probably explains her 54% win rate with the item. Talia and Victor are great examples of champs that essentially lose their counterplay building the item. Both of them very commonly play against aggressive matchups. Talia's an anti-dash champ, and most champs that have a dash play aggressively, and Victor's kit is incredibly oppressive against melees, which are traditionally aggressive lanes. So building ROA means that now you can't get to Talia, and you can't kill her, and Victor can play even more aggressively against melees because his mistakes mean less, and he can trade more evenly in the matchups he'd usually be outranged in. The Sandra also fits into this category. She's incredibly strong against assassins, and that hasn't changed, other than the fact that now she can make 1,000 mistakes and still be alive to fill that role. Plus, as a bonus, it means she can engage more often without having to ult herself. But in light of all this, the question we actually need to ask is, if everyone is going to start building this Bruiser build, what can you build that's going to be even better? The fact of the matter is, ROA is not a very good first item. It's very situational, it costs you a lot of damage, and it's honestly not that great with the mask items. It's just better than the other options. Undoubtedly, in a classic League of Legends fashion, people will build this item in the wrong context. For example, if you're against an unaggressive mid laner or a tanky jungler, having 400 HP really isn't that useful for you. And late game, 500 HP means very little because your opponents are going to be doing considerably more damage. So you're basically missing a bunch of damage for very little utility. ROA is just for the early game, and you can guarantee your enemies won't always capitalize on that properly. But none of that changes the fact that the other mage items are still dog shit. One big complication to the ROA build, aside from the fact that you're building an item that takes 10 minutes to scale up, is that its component items are absolutely god-awful. Mages are spell-based champions. Groundbreaking information, I know. Which means they essentially need a mix of AP, ability haste, and mana to do the optimal amount of damage. Now, being able to take legend haste and transcendence does mitigate ROA's build path, but ultimately you can either build mana or AP, but not both, which really sucks compared to Lost Chapter. Lost Chapter is one of, if not the best early item in the game. It gives mages the perfect stats, and its passive is unbelievably valuable. Arguably, it represents more than half the total value their parent items provide in practice. And the only downside to it is that it builds into items you don't really want to build first anymore. So our suggestion is just don't finish them. Buy the Lost Chapter and then skip straight onto your second item, which lets you build the best item for the game straight afterwards. So if you're against a squalor of squishies, you can technically buy an earlier Shadow Flame. Tons of tanks, you can now buy an earlier Leandrids. MR stackers, you get an earlier Void Staff? I'm not too sure about that one. Eventually, as you get later into the game, you can then complete your transition by building it into Malignant. So most champions' ultimates are extremely strong late game either way, and the power in Malignant's passive kind of scales exponentially if you think about it. The later the game, the more damage your ult deals because it has more base damage, better scalings, and you have more AP, which makes the ultimate haste all the more valuable. But that also means the pool deals more damage per tick, and because your ult deals more damage, the pool's larger and more ticks of the damage are applied. So although it doesn't really make sense as a first item for most champs, arguably it makes sense for everyone as a fourth item. So you end up losing almost nothing by completing the Lost Chapter, and stand to gain everything from building it as a component to begin with. And that's pretty much it. Thank you very much for watching, and if you do have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments section down below. But until next time, good luck and have fun.